Now I know what all you guys are thinking. Shosko, why are you uploading Totally Accurate Battle Simulator after not uploading anything for 2 weeks? Well,
Or not.
anyways guys, welcome back to my channel. I know it has been quite some time since my last upload. All I needed was just a bit of a break from YouTube to just honestly just take a mental break from it all and just really figure out what I want to do on this channel. And one thing I have been enjoying a lot lately in my free time is this game called Totally Accurate Battle Simulator. So if you don't know what this game is, it is a game on Steam that's only about $15. It is an absolute blast to play. And, well, as the name suggests, it is just by far the most accurate battle simulator you will ever find. Today, I'm going to be making my first unit guide, and I plan to make a unit guide for all of the different factions in this game. So since it is October, it is the Spookum Good season. Today we are going to start off with the Spooky Unit faction. The very first unit in this faction is the Skeleton Warrior, which costs 80 gold points. I don't know what you call it. I always call it gold. So how good is this unit? Well, one thing that it is pretty good for is its ability to scare away enemies. I don't know what it's actually called when it does this, but I call it the Spookum Good. The way this ability essentially works is if the skeleton gets a body shot off on the enemy, other enemy that got hit will start to run away. So this is both good and bad for you. It can be very useful to separate large groups of enemies out. So like if the enemy faction has just a big ball coming at you and you have a ton of skeleton warriors, what they can do is spook them away, and then your range units in the back, such as skeleton archers or really anything for that matter, can really be effective. But overall, is the skeleton warrior good? I'd say it's okay. And actually what's pretty funny is in a lot of one-on-ones it can just scare the enemy off the cliff on the other side of the map. The reason why it can also be not beneficial is if you're going for a strategy to where you have a bunch of pumpkin catapults or something that's very AoE damage based, the skeleton warriors will then separate out the enemy units that were once in a big like pile, if that makes sense, thus not letting your AoE units do maximum damage. That's the really only downside I see to it, other than it just being not the strongest. But then again, it's 80 gold. What do you expect for 80 gold? So next, I want to talk about the Skeleton Archer. So the Skeleton Archer is one of the crown jewels of the Spooky faction. It is only 180 gold per archer, which is not too expensive, and plus the archer does flame damage. So for my testing with this unit is it just does massive damage, and if you have a big ball of skeleton archers in the back of your line and then have a bunch of warriors or cheap units in the front, the skeleton archers are just gonna absolutely tear apart anything. The main thing they need though is distance, and if they have enough distance and enough time to get all of their arrows off constantly, well then you're in pretty good position. They are absolutely great for their cost value of 180, and most of the time they can win a 1v1 versus something of similar cost value. But since it is an archer, their skill and range is very based on how far away they are. If they're in close quarters, they are not the best, but they are also pretty quick to fire. But overall, is this unit good? Absolutely. I use it a lot of the times in my army as the back archer unit that's pretty cheap. You can spam them too. 15 of the units only cost 2,700 gold, which is not that bad. And overall, it is just a great unit to have in your army. Next, let's talk about the Candlehead. So the Candlehead is a very interesting unit. If you have an absolute crap ton of Candleheads versus only like 1 or 2 enemies, you are gonna win every time. This is because of their ability to constantly scare away enemies. Again, they do the Spookum Good, but not quite the same way the Skeleton Warrior does it. So the way they do it is if they get a shot off on the enemy, they will get slowly pushed back a little bit, but they can still walk forward. The stronger the enemy, the less effective the Candlehead shot is. But if you get like 20 Candleheads against like 1 king or 1 enemy, it's kind of funny to watch. So Candleheads are also pretty cheap. They only come in at 200 gold. So that is why they are very effective, because you can spam them. Except one thing I have noticed is they don't seem to do as much damage as a Skeleton Archer, but the Candlehead's secondary effect of pushing the enemy back is kind of their main, I would say, focal point, or the main reason why you would use them. So if you have a couple of Candleheads in a big ball in the back of your army, they can be pretty useful. Their range is decent, but I won't say amazing. And what's funny is in a 1v1 situation, they're gonna win pretty much every single time if they can keep their enemy away from them. But if the enemy is strong enough to withstand the candlehead shots and get close enough, then it's dead. It doesn't have the most health in the world from my experience, but overall it still feels like a pretty solid unit. So next is probably one of the most broken units in the game for its cost, and that is the Vampire. It costs only 200, and the reason why this unit is so effective is it will literally transform into a bat to close the distance between itself and the enemy, and then literally just like latch on until the enemy's dead or it dies. They literally will suck all the blood out of their foe. And when I was testing it in 1v1 situations, I had it win 11 times in a row versus other units of similar cost values from 200 to 400. It took the Halberd to beat it. And that's saying something. That unit is very powerful if you know what I'm talking about. But the Vampire is one that you can just spam. If you spam Vampires, most of the time they can win a situation that they just really should not be winning. And since they're so cheap, you can spam quite a bit. But it isn't the worst idea to put Vampires in the back of your army, because one thing you can do is have a couple of Vampires in the back of your army. They will transform into bats, rush the enemy, and then if you have range boys in the back, well, then they're covered, because the Vampires will be in the front taking all the fire, while your archers in the back can be doing all the work. So Vampires are very good for rushing, and they're just also hilarious to watch in action. The next unit in the spooky faction is quite a jump in cost. It is the Pumpkin Catapult. Is this unit better than the standard catapult, you might be wondering? And if you're wondering what that is, the medieval faction has a catapult for 1000 as well. So I tested the Pumpkin Catapult versus the standard catapult quite a bit, and for the most part the standard catapult did come off on top, but it always depended on who shot first. So the Pumpkin Catapult is extremely effective if it is far enough back in your army, although I will say it is not the best unit you can get for 1000 gold. There is better units within the spooky faction for the same value, and I'm going to talk about that one next, but overall the Pumpkin Catapult, very good, very high damage, but it does have its drawbacks. It has slow fire rate, has pretty low health, and if the enemies can close in on it, it's just done. But if you have maybe one catapult in the back of your army, that could be very useful for you, but if you have too many, it's a little sketchy. I will say for their cost value, they are not the best, but they do have high damage. That's pretty much the only useful factor with it. So next is the Swordcaster. This unit is a little insane. So, from my experience, for a 1000 cost unit, the Swordcaster is up there with the absolute best. The reason this is because he absolutely spams the enemy with swords. He just constantly jabs them, and he has unlimited ammo. There is nothing to worry about there, and his range is pretty decent. And from my experience, one of the best armies you can have is just simply 3 Swordcasters, for the most part will beat most other enemies. What they're very, very, very good at is picking off the enemies with low health quickly. Since they can spam the swords so fast, they can hit individual targets very, very, very quickly, thus making them super effective, and only for 1000 cost, they are very good. So if you were going to use a Swordcaster in an army, and you're going for a full spooky army for this example, why not? You would probably put them in between the archers and the skeleton warriors, because 1, Swordcasters have decent-ish health, and 2, they just absolutely spam the enemy front line with swords. So overall, the Swordcaster is absolutely fantastic for its cost of 1000 gold, and I would say is by far one of the best units in the spooky army, if not the second best, but it is pretty clear who is the #1 unit in the spooky army. So the best unit in the spooky army is the Reaper, and that's also the last unit we're going to talk about. The Reaper costs 2500 gold, and it is worth like every single penny. So the reason why the Reaper is so good is he just has such a huge AoE damaging scythe. He absolutely shreds enemies in large groups in like tight spaces. That's his absolute best thing. And 2, he has massive health, and he's also great at taking down other enemies with huge health too. But he has these dark matter like tentacles, just pure black, evil, spooky. He has those growing out the back of him, and essentially if an enemy in front of him is weak enough, he will just straight stab him with it, and then carry that enemy behind him for the rest of the match. He can just stab so many of the weaker enemies. So if he has like 6 enemy tribal clubmen in front of him or something of that caliber, if the original scythe swing he does doesn't kill him, then he's just going to use those tentacle things on the back to instant wipe him. The Reaper is an excellent unit in pretty much any army. It can hold its own and is an absolute beast, and is easily one of the best units in this game, unless you're talking about the units that are like 4,000 cost and higher, or the secret and legacy units, which I'm not talking about in this video. But if you guys would want to see a video going over all the legacy units and where to find all the secret units and stuff like that, comment down below, because I definitely want to do that in the future. So overall, I would say the Spooky Army is a fantastic army choice, if not one of the strongest armies in the game. Their units are relatively cheap unless you get up to, Swordcaster and Reaper, but the Vampires costing only 200 is pretty insane, and same with the Archers at only 180. They just do so much damage, and they also got the Reaper, which is just an absolute beast. So overall, I would greatly say that the Spooky Army is amazing, and if you have not tried them yet in this game, definitely try them out. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed my first unit guide for this game. I definitely want to make more unit guides in this game. It's been so fun to record videos for it. And yeah, I hope I see you all later this week with more content. Bye!